Donald Trump is once again threatening military action in the United States' own hemisphere, and once again signaling that he may not actually want a war. At the same time, Russia has stepped more openly into the Venezuela standoff, confirming that new air defense systems have been sent to Nicolás Maduro's government, just as US warships crowd the Caribbean. Trump is now serving his second current term as President of the United States. Having returned to the White House in January 2025, Maduro, for his part, has been sworn in for a highly disputed third term as President of Venezuela after elections in 2024 that opposition figures and many Western governments say were rigged together. Their confrontation has reopened an old Cold War question. How far will Washington go to push back an authoritarian ally of Moscow in Latin America? And how far will Moscow go to shield him? Trump has treated Venezuela as a test of US power since his first term, when he warned that he was not going to rule out a military option against Maduro's government. That hard line has returned in his second term, but with a new twist: a large US naval buildup, real use of force at sea, and now the first public hint of possible talks over recent months. The United States has deployed its biggest aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald R. Ford, to the Caribbean, along with multiple destroyers, cruisers, a nuclear-powered submarine, and advanced aircraft. Under the banner of a war on drug cartels, US forces have carried out a series of lethal strikes on boats in the Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific, killing more than 80 people in at least 21 attacks. According to Pentagon figures, human rights groups and some US allies say these operations risk breaking international law, accusing Washington of conducting extrajudicial killings. Far from any traditional battlefield support among the US public is limited. One recent poll showed just 35% of respondents backing the use of US military force in Venezuela without that country's consent to curb drug flows. It's against this backdrop that Trump has started to adjust his tone. Speaking to reporters in Florida, he floated the prospect of direct engagement with Maduro. He said, "We may be having some discussions with Maduro and we'll see how that turns out. They would like to talk." In the same news cycle, he hinted that he had already settled on a course of action, saying, "I sort of made up my mind on how to handle Venezuela." Yet when pressed in a separate interview about whether he was really prepared to go to war, he struck a much more cautious note. In comments reported by US media, Trump said, "I doubt it, I don't think so, but they've been treating us very badly." That combination, public threats, a visible armada, and carefully worded doubts about an actual invasion, has led many analysts to conclude that the White House is trying to maximize pressure while keeping an off-ramp open. In Caracas, Maduro has responded by portraying the standoff as a fight for Venezuela's sovereignty rather than a contest over drugs. As US warships and aircraft have edged closer, he has ordered the armed forces onto high alert. Venezuelan media quoted him declaring that the country was in a state of maximum preparedness for a possible clash with US forces. At the same time, Maduro has tried to appeal directly to American and international opinion by invoking the legacy of past conflicts. In a recent interview, he urged Washington not to repeat the mistakes of previous interventions, warning against what he called an Afghanistan-style forever war in Latin America. Maduro insists he is the victim of a campaign of disinformation. In a public message defending himself against US narco-terrorism charges, he argued that Venezuelan authorities were being smeared to justify escalation. He wrote to Trump that accusations linking his government to drug cartels were the most egregious instance of disinformation against our nation, intended to justify an escalation to armed conflict. Despite claiming victory in the contested 2024 election, Maduro is not recognized as Venezuela's legitimate leader by the United States or many European and Latin American governments, which instead back opposition candidate Edmundo González and figures such as Maria Corina Machado. That isolation has deepened as new sanctions have been imposed on senior officials and security chiefs surrounding Maduro. Still, Maduro retains support from key authoritarian allies, including Russia, Cuba, and Nicaragua, and he continues to frame the confrontation with Washington as a broader struggle against imperialism and Western domination. Moscow's involvement in Venezuela is not new. Over the past 2 decades, Russia has become one of Caracas's main arms suppliers, selling an estimated $20 billion worth of military equipment, ranging from fighters and helicopters to tanks and air defense systems. Russian-made S-300 air defense batteries were delivered years ago, giving Venezuela a layered system designed to deter hostile aircraft. Russian technicians, military trainers, and private security contractors have all been reported in the country at various points, helping to maintain equipment and bolster Maduro's grip on power. In recent years, this relationship has been deepened and formalized. During a visit to Moscow to mark the 80-year anniversary of the end of World War II, Maduro announced a new decade-long alliance with Russia. After meeting Vladimir Putin, he said, "There is perfect harmony between Russia and Venezuela." For the Kremlin, Venezuela offers something highly valuable, a friendly foothold in the Western Hemisphere at a time of open confrontation with the United States and NATO in Europe. Analysts say the country provides not only arms sales and economic opportunities, but also options for intelligence collection and, in a crisis, a place from which to project military power close to US shores. That broader partnership has taken on new urgency in recent weeks. A senior member of Russia's parliament, Alexei Zhuravlev, has confirmed that Moscow has delivered additional advanced air defense systems to Venezuela as tensions with Washington climb. He told Russian media that newly supplied systems include the Panzer S-1 and Buk M-2E, transported on Il-76 cargo aircraft run by a Russian logistics airline that has been sanctioned by the US for moving military equipment. According to Zhuravlev, the Panzer S-1 and Buk M-2E are meant to complement the S-300VM batteries already in Venezuelan service, creating a more robust umbrella that can target aircraft, helicopters, cruise missiles and drones across multiple ranges. He also indicated that Russia could go further. He said, "Information about the volumes and exact names of what's being imported from Russia is classified, so the Americans could be in for some surprises." In the same interview, Zhuravlev argued that nothing in international law prevents Moscow from sending modern offensive weapons, such as Oreshnik ballistic missiles or Caliber cruise missiles, to Caracas. He said, "At least no international obligations restrict Russia from doing so." Western officials have not confirmed the full extent of the new deliveries, but flight tracking data shows Russian cargo aircraft landing in Caracas in late October and returning in quick succession, with stops in other Kremlin-aligned Latin American capitals. Even if only some of the reported systems arrive, they would significantly strengthen Venezuela's ability to threaten enemy aircraft and complicate any US plans for airstrikes. Venezuela's pre-existing Russian-supplied S-300VM systems already cover large swathes of airspace, with ranges of up to around 120 miles, and are designed to counter both aircraft and ballistic missiles. The Buk M2 systems, with a shorter range of roughly 30 miles, are optimized for striking aircraft, helicopters, and some cruise missiles at medium altitude. The Panzer S-1 fills a different role. It combines missiles and guns on a mobile platform and is used to protect key assets, including air bases and long-range missile batteries, from low-flying aircraft, drones, and precision-guided weapons. In practical terms, this means US pilots or drone operators approaching Venezuelan airspace in any conflict scenario would face a more layered, dense, and unpredictable set of defenses. Experts caution that air defense systems alone do not guarantee safety for a regime, particularly against a vastly superior military like that of the United States, but they do raise the likely cost of any operation and increase the risk of miscalculation. Commanders would need to assume that even limited strikes, aimed, for example, at disabling radar or targeting suspected drug trafficking infrastructure, could trigger a wider exchange. That dynamic is precisely what worries many governments in the region, including those that strongly oppose Maduro. They fear that a conflict between Washington and Caracas, with Moscow in the background, could destabilize not only Venezuela, but also neighboring Colombia, Brazil, and Caribbean states already grappling with migration, economic turmoil, and organized crime. Inside Washington, the Venezuela confrontation is not only about foreign policy, it is also about domestic politics. Trump and his advisors have linked the operations off Venezuela's coast to broader themes central to his platform: stopping illegal drugs, tackling cross-border crime, and projecting strength against what they call narco-terrorists. The administration has labeled Venezuelan criminal organizations, including the Gang Tren de Aragua and the alleged Cartel de los Soles, as foreign terrorist organizations, arguing that they are deeply entwined with Maduro's security apparatus. Officials in Washington contend that Maduro himself leads a drug trafficking network and have offered large rewards for information leading to his arrest. Critics, however, note that most of the cocaine reaching the United States still originates in Colombia and is trafficked mainly through the Pacific, not through Venezuelan waters, where the US is concentrating its strikes. Some analysts argue that the counter-narcotics framing allows the administration to justify a massive military presence and covert operations while retaining flexibility. If Trump ultimately decides against attacking targets on Venezuelan soil, he can still claim victory in a war on cartels. One senior official quoted in US reporting summed up this approach, saying that by packaging the buildup as a counter-narcotics mission, Trump can always pull back and declare the threat neutralized without ever launching strikes inside Venezuela. At the same time, Trump faces pressure from multiple sides. Hardliners around Secretary of State Marco Rubio see Venezuela as a central front against authoritarian regimes in Latin America and argue that only overwhelming pressure up to and including the threat of force will dislodge Maduro. On the other side, elements of Trump's own populist base are skeptical of a new foreign entanglement, especially one that could resemble the long, messy wars. He once condemned Maduro's strategy appears centered on three goals: survival, deterrence, and bargaining power. First, he has used repression and patronage to keep key elements of the security forces loyal, even as the economy continues to struggle and millions of Venezuelans have fled abroad. Second, he is deepening his military ties with Russia to raise the costs of any US attack. The arrival of Pantsir and Buk systems is a clear signal that Venezuela will not be left to face the United States alone, at least in terms of equipment. If Moscow were to go further and provide ballistic or cruise missiles, it would mark a dramatic escalation in great power competition in the Western Hemisphere. Third, Maduro is trying to keep a diplomatic door ajar, even while denouncing the United States. People familiar with his government's calculations say he would be open to a negotiated exit or to some form of power-sharing arrangement if it came with ironclad guarantees, amnesty for himself and top lieutenants, removal of bounties and sanctions, and safe exile. For now, though, there is little sign that such a deal is imminent. So has Trump really backed down from what some in Washington and Latin America have called a march toward war? On one level, his recent comments do mark a shift. After weeks of leaks about options for strikes inside Venezuela and headlines about the largest US naval buildup in the Caribbean since the Cuban Missile Crisis, Trump is now publicly entertaining talks and openly expressing doubt about launching a war. The quote, "We may be having some discussions with Maduro," sits uneasily alongside the idea of imminent regime change strikes. But this is also classic brinkmanship. Trump's inner circle has long debated how far to push Maduro, and the president has a history of using unpredictable rhetoric and military pressure as leverage before pivoting to negotiation, or at times to sudden attacks. The deployment of the Gerald R. Ford and repeated boat strikes give his threats a harder edge than previous rounds of sanctions and diplomatic isolation alone. For now, the most accurate description may be this: Trump is stepping back from the brink of immediate war while trying to keep maximum pressure on Maduro. He said, "We're stopping drug dealers and drugs from coming into our country." At the same time, he has emphasized that the new terrorist designation for the alleged cartel allows us to target Maduro's assets, even if he has not yet decided to do so. What makes this crisis especially volatile is the triangular nature of the confrontation. Trump's decisions are not only about Venezuela, they are also about signaling strength to Russia and to other US rivals. Maduro's choices are not only about his own survival, they are also about proving that alliances with Moscow and other authoritarian partners have real value. Putin's moves, meanwhile, are about much more than arms sales. They are about challenging US dominance close to American shores. As long as Russian weapons keep flowing, Venezuelan defenses will become more sophisticated, and US planners will have to assume that any escalation could entangle another nuclear-armed power, even if indirectly. As long as US warships remain on station and drone strikes continue, Venezuelan leaders will have to calculate the risk that a single misjudgment, an intercepted aircraft, a misidentified boat, a missile radar switching on at the wrong moment, could trigger a spiral of retaliation. For now, both Washington and Caracas are talking tough while leaving small openings for diplomacy. Trump has floated talks. Maduro has sent messages insisting he is willing to negotiate under the right conditions. Zhuravlev has hinted that the story of Russian arms deliveries may hold some surprises for Washington, but he has also framed those shipments as legal and defensive. Whether this moment becomes the start of a climb down or the prelude to a deeper crisis will depend on choices in all three capitals. But one thing is already clear: even as Trump appears to edge away from outright war, the arrival of new Russian weapons in Venezuela has raised the stakes and made any future confrontation far more dangerous.